Emily Harper thought she knew everything about her husband, Mark Johnson, until a forgotten phone and a single missed call unraveled the quiet life they had built. As secrets unravel and a second family emerges hundreds of miles away, Emily is forced into a chilling race for the truth, uncovering a web of lies so intricate, even Mark's real name isn't what it seems. What else has he been hiding, and how far will he go to keep it buried? Emily Johnson never thought of her life as extraordinary, but to outsiders, it was the kind of stability most people envied. Her days were filled with lesson plans, early morning coffee, and gentle laughter with her husband Mark. They lived in a modest yet cozy home tucked into a quiet Ohio neighborhood, where everything seemed safe, steady, and scripted. Emily taught third grade at the local elementary school, and had spent the last 6 years building a comfortable life with Mark. Their neighbors would often refer to them as the perfect couple, and Emily took pride in that. Mark was an IT consultant, calm, intelligent, and always on the go. His work required frequent travel, mostly to cities a few hours away, though sometimes he would disappear for several days at a time, citing client meetings and system installations. It had been this way since they got married, and Emily never questioned it too deeply. He always returned home with souvenirs, little trinkets or snacks from whatever town he had visited, and a story or two about demanding clients or delayed flights. But lately, something had shifted. Subtly at first, Mark became less interested in conversation. He stopped bringing souvenirs. He spent more time in the garage, or locked in his home office with the door shut and blinds drawn. Emily noticed that his phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket or face down on the table. He started taking calls late at night, murmuring into the phone in a low voice and walking away from her when she entered the room. The changes were small, easy to explain away if she tried hard enough. Maybe work was becoming more stressful, maybe he was just tired, but the unease in Emily's chest wouldn't go away. She brushed it off for a while, convincing herself that every marriage had its quiet seasons. Still something didn't feel right, and it wasn't going away. One evening, after Mark had left for yet another business trip, Emily found herself staring at his side of the closet. His usual work clothes were gone, but she noticed he'd taken his favorite casual jacket, the one he usually wore when they went on weekend outing. That struck her as odd. If he was attending business meetings, why would he take his casual wear? She tried to shake the feeling, but her eyes fell on the nightstand drawer, his drawer. Mark always kept it locked. That had never seemed strange before. After all, she had her own drawer, but something about it now made her pulse quicken. It was late, and the house was quiet, except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the drawer, her breath shallow. A thought crossed her mind. Maybe she could open it. She searched their shared bathroom for spare keys, unsure what she was even looking for. Hidden behind the medicine cabinet was a small ring of keys. She tried one, then another, until finally the drawer clicked open. Her hands trembled as she slid it forward. Inside were a few folders, some loose receipts, and an old phone, not his current one. Her heart raced as she picked it up. It was powered off, but the battery still had life. She turned it on. As the screen lit up, so did her curiosity and fear. There were photos she'd never seen. Pictures of Mark smiling with people she didn't recognize. A woman, 2 children. The background wasn't anywhere Emily had ever been. There were text messages too, words filled with affection, pet names he never used for her. Her stomach turned. She didn't want to believe what she was seeing. It didn't make sense. It had to be a misunderstanding, but deep down, something had already cracked. Emily sat there staring at the screen in silence. A dozen questions ran through her head, each one darker than the last. Who was the woman in the photos? Were the children? How long had this been going on? In that moment, she realized something she could no longer ignore. The man she thought she knew might not be who he claimed to be at all. The days that followed were a blur of confusion for Emily. She went to work, smiled at her students, waved politely to her neighbors, and came home to an empty house that now felt unfamiliar. Her mind kept replaying the photos on the old phone, Mark's face beaming with warmth, holding hands with a woman she had never met, cradling 2 small children who looked just enough like him to be his own. She hadn't said a word to anyone, not even her sister or closest friend. Emily needed time to process, to decide whether she was overreacting or unraveling something real. She placed the phone back in the drawer exactly how she found it. She hadn't confronted Mark when he returned from Michigan 2 nights later, and part of her hated herself for that, but her instinct told her to wait, to observe, to understand the full picture before making any move. That night Mark came home with a box of donuts and a weak excuse about an airport delay. He seemed distracted, avoiding eye contact, talking too quickly when she asked about his trip. Emily nodded along, acting interested. She played the role of the trusting wife, but inside, her nerves were tightening like a coiled spring. Then the phone calls started. At first, they came once or twice a week, usually between 10 p.m. and midnight. The screen would light up with unknown caller, and Mark would glance at it, then press decline. Emily noticed how he grew agitated afterward, pacing or stepping outside to make his own calls in hushed tones. One evening, she stood quietly behind the kitchen doorway as he took a call on the back porch. His voice was calm but tense. She couldn't hear everything, just fragments. "I told you not tonight, and I'll be there soon." When he re-entered the house, he acted like nothing had happened. Emily's suspicion deepened. If this had anything to do with work, why the secrecy? Why the need for whispered calls and hidden phones? Her heart wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but her gut told her otherwise. She started paying more attention. Mark's receipts went from hotel stays and rental cars, to grocery purchases and small store transactions, items you wouldn't expect a man traveling alone to buy. Things like packs of juice boxes, children's cereal, and women's He never mentioned anyone else traveling with him. One night, Mark left his new phone charging in the living room while he showered. Emily sat on the couch beside it, paralyzed with temptation. Her fingers hovered over the screen. It was locked, and she didn't know the passcode. But as she stared, a text message preview flashed. "Don't forget Lila's recital Thursday. She's counting on you." Lila. Emily blinked hard, stunned. The name wasn't familiar. It sounded like a child's name, someone he clearly knew well enough to be reminded of a recital. She quickly jotted the message down, committing the number to memory. That night, she barely slept. Mark lay beside her snoring gently, unaware of the storm building inside her. Emily was now consumed by questions she could no longer push aside. Who was Lila? Who was the woman texting him? And why did Mark keep that part of his life sealed off like a secret he never planned to share? Unable to take it anymore, Emily called in sick the next morning, and sat down at her kitchen table with a laptop, a notepad, and her heart pounding like a drum. She searched the number from the message. No name came up, but it was based in a small Michigan town, one of the same towns Mark frequently visited. She scrolled through local school websites in that town, unsure of what she was looking for, until she stumbled upon an elementary school's event calendar. A listing caught her eye. Spring recital, Thursday, Grade 1, Lila Monroe performing at 6 p.m. Monroe, a different last name, but the same first name, the same town. Emily leaned back in her chair stunned. That couldn't be a coincidence. Mark had lied to her before, but this was something else. He wasn't just hiding a secret, he was living another life, and she had just taken her first step into it. Emily spent the next few days in a fog of quiet panic, her every waking thought consumed by what she had uncovered. The name Lila Monroe repeated in her mind like a song she couldn't turn off. She couldn't bring herself to confront Mark, not yet. Instead she needed more proof, something that could answer the question that had begun to hollow out her insides. Who exactly was her husband when he wasn't with her? Mark announced, as casually as ever, that he had to leave again for work. "Just a couple nights," he said while folding his shirts and slipping them into a duffel bag. "Clients having issues with their servers. I might be back Friday, but it could run into the weekend." Emily smiled and nodded, playing the role perfectly, but behind her eyes burned a quiet fire. She had already taken a personal day from school, and packed her own bag, only hers was hidden under a blanket in the trunk of her car. She waited an hour after Mark left before she followed him. The GPS on her phone was already tracking his movements, using a location-sharing app she had secretly installed a few days prior, disguised as a common photo filter tool. The blue dot on her screen pulsed steadily as it moved north toward Michigan. He wasn't heading to a corporate campus or a client's office, He was driving toward a small residential area just outside a town called Fairview Pines. The drive was long and tense. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel harder than she needed to, her thoughts cycling faster than the car's engine. She went over every possibility. Maybe it was an ex he hadn't told her about. Maybe he had a niece named Lila. Maybe, just maybe, there was a reasonable explanation. But deep down she knew the truth had already started to show itself. She was simply chasing the rest of it. She arrived in Fairview Pines just before dusk. It was a quiet town with clean sidewalks and small shops, the kind of place where everyone probably knew each other's name. Her GPS dot had stopped at an address on the edge of a tree-lined cul-de-sac. She parked a few houses down and waited. Within minutes, Mark's familiar black SUV pulled into the driveway of a modest white house, with a red door. He got out of the car carrying a bag of groceries. Emily's heart thudded. She pulled her hoodie tighter over her head and lowered in her seat, watching from behind the cover of a neighbor's car. Then the door opened. A woman stepped out to greet him. Tall, brunette, wearing a worn flannel shirt, and a look of familiarity that made Emily's blood run cold. The woman kissed him on the cheek and took the bag from his hands, and then two children ran into the yard, a boy and a girl. The girl, probably around 6, had Mark's exact eye. Emily couldn't breathe. She watched in disbelief as Mark bent down, scooping the little girl into his arms, spinning her around, laughing, a kind of laugh Emily hadn't heard in years. The woman stood in the doorway smiling, calling them in. He followed her inside, holding the little girl's hand. The door closed behind them. Emily remained in her car completely still, feeling like her bones had turned to glass. The picture was clearer now, painfully clear. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a hidden ex or a secret niece. This was a life, another life that Mark had been living. She sat for nearly an hour, unable to move, unable to process what she had seen. The red door never opened again. Lights flickered on inside the house. Shadows passed by the windows. Emily stared at the building like it was a haunted house, something unreal, something impossible. She took a picture of the address, the car in the driveway, and the front of the house. Then, with her hands shaking and her heart shattered, she started the long drive home. She knew there was no turning back now. She had crossed a line, and the truth was bigger than she had ever imagined. Mark didn't just lie. He built an entirely separate world. The drive back to Ohio was darker than any road Emily had ever traveled, even in daylight. The miles passed in a blur, headlights flashing like sirens across her windshield, as her mind reeled with images she couldn't erase. Mark's smile as he lifted the little girl, the woman's hand brushing his shoulder, the red door closing behind the man she thought was hers. It wasn't just betrayal, it was disorientation. Everything she believed about her life was suddenly foreign, unfamiliar. At home she sat on the couch for hours in silence, phone in hand, staring at the photos she'd taken of the house. Part of her wanted to delete them, pretend it was all a mistake. But another part, the part that had followed him, the part that opened the drawer and read the texts, knew there was no going back. She needed more. She needed to know exactly who this other woman was. She needed a name. Emily opened her laptop and started digging. A reverse address look revealed the name Sarah Monroe as the current occupant of the house. No relation to Mark Johnson appeared in public databases, but Emily knew that names didn't always tell the full story. Then she checked social media. A quick search on Facebook turned up a Sarah Monroe living in Fairview Pines, Michigan. Her profile was public, at least partially. Emily scrolled through her photos with shaking hands. There she was, Sarah, smiling in nearly every picture, always in the same backyard Emily had seen earlier that day. Birthday cakes, Halloween costumes, school recitals, and in many of the photos was the same little girl Emily had seen running through the yard. Her name was tagged repeatedly, Lila Monroe. What chilled Emily to the bone wasn't just the confirmation, it was the pictures of Mark, dozens of them, hidden in plain sight. Mark at family dinners, Mark helping Lila learn to ride a bike, Mark next to Sarah, arms wrapped around her waist. His name was never tagged, no mention of Mark Johnson, just Mike. Mike. Emily felt physically ill. Her husband had a second name, a second identity, a second family. The truth settled in her chest like a stone. She wasn't just competing with another woman, she had been erased, rewritten. In Sarah's world, Emily didn't exist. Mark had built two separate lives so carefully, so methodically, that it was only by chance and suspicion that one bled into the other. Emily knew she needed help, legal help, maybe even psychological, but more than that, she needed someone to witness this, someone to tell her she wasn't losing her mind. She called her childhood friend Rachel, someone with a background in law enforcement, someone she could trust. Rachel came over the next morning. Emily laid everything out, the texts, the old phone, the house in Michigan, the Facebook profile, the photos. Rachel listened quietly, her face going pale as the story unfolded. When Emily finished, Rachel leaned forward with a seriousness Emily hadn't seen before. "This isn't just infidelity," Rachel said. "This is bigamy, and possibly fraud." That word hit Emily like a slap. Bigamy. It sounded criminal, and maybe it was. Together, they started documenting everything. Rachel helped her organize files, capture screenshots, and track Mark's travel records based on credit card statements and mileage logs from his vehicle. What they found confirmed what Emily feared most. This wasn't a recent affair. The receipts went back 6 years, the age of Lila. Emily had been married to a man who had married someone else while still legally bound to her. And it wasn't some rushed mistake, he had maintained both families for over half a decade. What kind of person could live like that, smile like, sleep beside 2 different women in 2 different states, and still walk out the door like nothing was wrong? Emily's stomach churned. Mark wasn't just cheating, he was living 2 lives like an actor who never forgot his lines. Now she had the truth, and she knew exactly where to go next. Mark returned home late Friday evening, just as he said he would, like clockwork. Emily was waiting in the living room, a book open in her lap that she hadn't read a single word of. He stepped inside casually, dropped his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, and gave her a half smile like he always did. "Traffic was a nightmare," he muttered, walking past her toward the kitchen. Emily watched him with cold clarity. Everything about him looked the same jacket, the same tired eyes, the same easygoing charm, but now it felt like she was staring at a stranger. The man in her living room was not Mark Johnson, devoted husband. He was Mike Monroe, father to Lila, partner to Sarah, liar to everyone. She didn't say a word that night. Instead she watched him, the way he checked his phone every few minutes, the way he answered texts with brief smiles and turned the screen away when she looked in his direction. He had no idea she knew everything, no idea that the world he'd built was already cracking apart beneath his feet. The next morning, Emily made her move. She told him she was heading out to run errands, and kissed him on the cheek. He barely noticed. Instead of going to the store, she met Rachel at a quiet coffee shop across town. They had gathered more information over the last couple days, court records, marriage licenses, even birth certificates. What they found confirmed Emily's worst fear. Mark had never divorced Sarah. In the eyes of the law, his marriage to Emily wasn't even valid. She was, unknowingly, the other woman. Rachel helped Emily file a formal report. The words on the paperwork felt surreal. Suspected bigamy, marriage fraud, identity deception, but it was real. There were legal consequences for what Mark had done. As painful as the betrayal was, Emily found a sliver of strength in the possibility of justice. She was no longer just trying to understand what had happened. She was preparing for what came next. That night, back at home, Emily noticed something unusual. Mark was packing again. He said it was another urgent call from a client, another 2-day trip. He made no mention of where he was going, and this time, he didn't offer to bring back donuts or call from the road. Emily played along. "Drive safe," she said, masking every trace of emotion. When he left, she waited exactly 1 hour before driving back to Fairview Pines, this time with Rachel close behind in a separate car. They parked near the same red-doored house and watched. Within minutes, Mark pulled up and walked straight inside, welcomed once again by Sarah and the children. This time, Emily had a camera with a zoom lens. Every moment Mark holding Lila, Sarah resting her head on his shoulder, was captured, time-stamped and stored. She didn't cry this time. Instead, Emily drove to a motel nearby, where she spent the night quietly filing digital copies of every image, every document, every piece of evidence she had. The next morning she sent it all to a lawyer, to her sister, and most importantly to Sarah Monroe. The email was brief. It included photos, timelines, and scanned legal files. No angry words, no personal attacks, just facts. It took less than 2 hours for Sarah to respond.
The subject line simply read, "I had no idea." In that moment, Emily realized that she wasn't alone in this. Sarah had been deceived too. The man they both loved, trusted, built families with, he had played them both masterfully, for years, and now the lies were beginning to collapse. Mark had built a world out of secrets, balancing two families like spinning plates, but plates, eventually, and Emily had just started the process of letting every single one of them crash to the floor.
The silence that followed Sarah's email reply was louder than any argument Emily could have imagined. Just 4 words, "I had no idea." That was it. No questions, no outrage, no apology. Only disbelief. Emily read the message over and over again, trying to picture the moment Sarah opened that email, scanned through the photos, and recognized the man she loved smiling in someone else's home. By now, the truth wasn't just exposed, it was bleeding out in every direction. 2 women, 2 homes, 2 families, and 1 man who had woven them all together with lies. Emily knew the next step wasn't confrontation, it was coordination. She replied to Sarah later that day. Carefully worded, not emotional. She explained what she knew, how she found out, and how long it had gone on. She included copies of marriage documents, dates of Mark's travels, and even the fake name he used. Hours passed. Finally, Sarah responded again. This time she was ready to talk. The 2 women agreed to meet. Neutral ground, away from their homes, away from the shadows Mark had cast over their lives. A quiet diner on the state border. When Sarah walked in, Emily felt like she was staring into a mirror warped by tragedy. They didn't look alike, but they carried the same hollow eyes, the same confusion, the same bruised trust. They sat across from each other and ordered coffee they wouldn't drink. Sarah brought pictures, so did Emily. They laid them out across the table like puzzle pieces from different boxes. Birthday parties, beach trips, holidays. Mark smiling in every one. He had even worn the same jacket in photos with both women, like he didn't care if the worlds overlapped as long as the lies stayed separate. Then Sarah said something that stopped Emily cold. "He told me his wife died in a car crash 7 years ago." Emily blinked, stunned. That was the year they'd met. The year he first showed up at her school to fix the building's computer system, all friendly smiles and quiet charm. She realized with chilling clarity that he had stepped into her life while pretending another one had ended. He hadn't just betrayed her, he had erased her entirely in someone else's version of the story. Sarah went on. Mike as she still called him, had a drawer full of letters he claimed were from his deceased wife. Sweet, made-up notes he sometimes read aloud to Lila when she asked about her angel mommy. The fabrication was so complete it almost sounded like fiction. But it was the story he chose to live, and both women had unknowingly played roles in it. They sat in silence after that, the weight of it all pressing down. There were no tears left to cry. Just a quiet understanding that something had to be done, together. They agreed not to warn him, not yet. Instead they would speak to the authorities in both states. They would press charges, bigamy, fraud, identity deception, and let the legal system handle what emotion no longer could. But they also knew Mark was smart, manipulative. He had gotten away with this for years without raising suspicion. If he caught wind that they were working together, he might disappear entirely. So Emily returned home and played her part. She smiled when he called. She laughed at his jokes. She even left his favorite beer in the fridge. For 3 more days, she lived beside the man she now knew as a liar, acting like everything was normal while she and Sarah filed police reports, gathered witness statements, and spoke with prosecutors. The case was moving faster than either of them expected. There were laws in both states that made what Mark had done a criminal offense, and with proof now sitting in the hands of law enforcement, it was only a matter of time before someone knocked on his door. Emily didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but she knew one thing for certain. Mark had spent years building a life from lies. Now the truth was about to tear it all apart. The morning it all unraveled started like any other. Mark was in the kitchen making coffee, humming a tune under his breath, acting like the man he pretended to be. Emily sat at the table, watching him with the calm stillness of someone who already knew the ending of the story. The police were scheduled to arrive within the hour. She had timed it perfectly, just as Sarah had in Michigan. Both homes, same day, same moment. Emily's heart pounded beneath her sweater, but her face gave nothing away. She knew that if Mark sensed even a flicker of tension, he'd slip away. He always had backup plans, extra keys, hidden money, disconnected address. He had built his lies with layers, and she suspected he could vanish just as easily as he'd lied about everything else. That's why she had to play it exactly right. Mark kissed her forehead like he always did, sipping his coffee, checking his phone. He told her he might run out for a bit, something about a forgotten package at the office. She nodded like it didn't matter, but as soon as he moved toward the door, the knock came, sharp, firm, unmistakable. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She stood slowly. Mark hesitated. The knock came again, followed by voices, two men, official, direct. His face changed, just slightly. His smile faltered, his eyes narrowed. He looked at her, not with confusion, but with recognition. He knew. Before he could turn the knob, the door opened with force. Two officers stepped in, one announcing their presence, the other already lifting a folded warrant from his coat. Mark froze, one hand halfway to his back pocket. "Don't," one officer warned. Emily stepped back, her hands trembling now. It was happening. Mark didn't argue. He didn't speak. The man who had talked his way out of every corner, who had spun stories for two separate lives, said nothing as they placed him in cuffs, not a single word as they read him his rights, not even a glance toward her. As they led him outside, neighbors peeked from windows, dogs barked. A car slowed down to watch. Emily stood in the doorway, watching it all unfold like a scene from someone else's life. The man she had married, trusted, loved, built a future with, was being placed in the back of a police car, for crimes she hadn't even known existed. A month ago, she didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel rage. What she felt was emptiness, as if all the years, the birthdays, the anniversaries had been written in chalk and someone had just poured rain over it all. Later that day, she got the call from Sarah. They had picked him up there too. A simultaneous arrest. 2 counties, 2 lives colliding in a way he never expected. In both homes, officers had found evidence, fake IDs, 2 marriage certificates, separate financial accounts. Mark had even created a third identity, one he hadn't used yet. A backup, maybe in case the double life fell apart. Emily was stunned by the depth of it. He had planned for collapse, but not for discovery. The news spread fast. Friends called, confused. Colleagues reached out, unsure what to believe. Emily kept her answers brief. She didn't owe anyone more than the truth. He was not who we thought he was. The hardest part came that night. After the adrenaline wore off, she walked through the house alone, touching the things he had left behind. His jacket on the hook, his shoes by the door, the half-filled mug still warm on the counter. Ghosts of a life she now knew had never really belonged to her. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the space he used to sleep in. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing the ground you thought was solid had always been hollow underneath. But now it was out in the open. The secret was gone, and all that was left was the truth. The trial began 6 months later, but for Emily, the real judgment had already happened the moment Mark was taken away in handcuffs. That day had split her life in two, before the lie and after. Now, sitting in the courtroom, she watched as the man who once promised her forever stood on the other side of the room, shackled not just by chains, but by the very lies he had crafted for years. The courtroom was cold and sterile. Every sound, footsteps, paper shuffles, whispered conversations, echoed like thunder. Mark sat beside his attorney, wearing a dark suit that didn't quite hide the weight he had lost since his arrest. His hair was shorter, his face hollow, but it wasn't guilt that lived in his eyes. It was calculation, like he was still trying to figure out how to win. Across the aisle, Sarah sat next to her attorney, her posture stiff, jaw clenched. Her hands gripped a folder full of documents that outlined her own version of betrayal. She didn't look at Emily, but the air between them hummed with a strange, silent understanding. They had been strangers before this, women living parallel lives. Now they were bound by the same scar. The prosecutor laid it all out. 2 legal marriages, overlapping, 2 homes, multiple identities, and a web of financial deceit that crossed state lines. Mark had used false social security numbers to open bank accounts, filed taxes under different names, and even claimed dependents in both households. What had started as a man cheating on his wife had evolved into a federal investigation, fraud, bigamy, identity. Emily sat through it all, each detail stripping away whatever fragments of illusion might have still clung to her memory of him. When it was her turn to testify, the courtroom grew still. She walked to the witness stand, her heels clicking softly on the floor. Mark didn't look at. That silence between them now stretched wider than it ever had before. Emily told her story not with emotion but with facts. She spoke clearly, her voice steady, recounting the days she discovered the phone, the trip to Michigan, the photos, the files, the lie. Every word was like cutting through the fog that Mark had left behind. She saw jurors shift in their seats. She saw them wince when she described the fake name he used, the story he told Sarah about his dead wife, and how Lila had been raised to believe her mother had passed away while Emily was still very much alive. It was no longer a case about cheating. It was about fabrication, manipulation, and the psychological destruction of two lives. After Sarah testified, the courtroom felt heavier. She recounted how she'd believed Mark was a widower. She talked about Lila, about how he read letters from a wife who never existed. One juror wiped a tear away quietly. Emily didn't cry but her hands tightened in her lap. The cruelty of it all ran deeper than anything she could have imagined when this nightmare began. It didn't take the jury long. Mark was found guilty on multiple counts. The judge called his actions a sustained campaign of deceit, engineered for personal gain, without regard for the emotional or legal damage inflicted on others. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Neither Emily nor Sarah looked at him as he was led away. There was no satisfaction, no joy in watching someone be broken, only the closure that comes with knowing a door had finally been closed and locked for good. In the months that followed, Emily started to rebuild. She sold the house, changed her last name, and began working with a non-profit that supported victims of fraud. It was slow, it was painful, but it was real. One day, a letter arrived. No return address, just a single sheet of paper in Mark's handwriting. "I never meant to hurt you." She didn't finish reading it. She folded it back up, placed it in a box with the rest of the files, and tucked it deep in her closet. Because the truth was no longer about what he meant, it was about what she had survived.